I love entry fragging. Whether it's running to a brick wall to out-aim the other guy, or using strategy and intelligent play to gain the upper hand. I've spent nearly 5,000 hours doing it. So I wanted to pass on everything I've learned from studying pros and playing a lot myself. Now, before getting into the thick of it, this video is for beginners all the way to advanced players. So no matter where you are in your Counter-Strike journey, I hope you'll find something that helps you. I split it into sections so you can come back easily. Also, I wanted to say that this video is my perspective on entry fragging. One of the most beautiful things about Counter-Strike is that there's no correct answer to a situation, just decisions. So two players can be in the exact same situation, but make completely different choices and both win. This is what I learned and how I think about Counter-Strike from watching and listening to professionals over the years. A guide, not a definitive law on Counter-Strike, which is important to understand so you don't get held back by ideas of correct play. This video is long enough, so let's get moving on. What is entry fragging? This is a good place to start. Entry fragging at its simplest is going in first, whether that's a bomb site or anywhere else on the map. Being the first one to take the bullets, nades and attention of the enemy to try and brute force into an area to take control. Entry fraggers aren't traditionally at the top of the scoreboard. When the entry fragger does reach there, you can be sure they won their team the game. That's because, in my opinion, there's little more impactful than running into a bomb site and killing everyone there. Not all frags are created equal, and few frags are more impactful than the entry frag. Unfortunately, they're also much more difficult to get. Whilst you can argue that the frag in a 1v1 at the end of the round is more impactful than the entry frag, it's also usually easier. The entry frags are notoriously difficult, and this role is not for the faint of heart. So let's move on to the mindset of an entry fragger. Entry fragging is tough. Tougher than lurking or AWPing. Not in terms of skill, but in terms of mentality. Entry fragging has the highest highs and the lowest lows. When everything is working great, running in and winning rounds with little to no help feels great. But when your team is losing, no one's trading you, or even helping you with utility, that's when it gets really difficult. And even when things are going well, you can play almost perfectly and still die with no impact, watching your team play 4v5 for the rest of the round. And you need to reset and bring your best, being unaffected by how many deaths are on the scoreboard. So yeah, being a dedicated entry fragger is tough, which is why the best entry fraggers have the strongest mentality. A good entry fragger will have strong self-belief, focus on the process instead of the outcome, and definitely not be focused on their KD. So I believe the best mindset for a new entry fragger is a learning mentality. Run it down. Don't stop. I'm not joking. The best way to learn is by doing. Run it down everywhere, anywhere, all at once. And keep running it down until you understand exactly all the entry timings. You need to have a really good idea of all the ways an initial gunfight can go down, so the muscle memory is embedded in you. In my opinion, there's no better way to learn these entry timings than just running it down. Does this sound miserable to you? Then maybe entry fragging is not for you, because this does work. And speaking more generally about playing to improve rather than playing to win is a much better strategy. You won't be as affected by each round's outcome or each game's outcome, and you'll focus on being and playing your best. It gives meaning to those games that are complete stomps where the enemy is much better than your team, and you'll be learning way more in this mindset. To cap this section on mentality off, I think it's important to know that in Counter-Strike, you're only as good as you believe you are. It is a confidence game. So when you're going for an entry, you better believe that you can kill them. I even have a technique I use from time to time, some sort of as a joke. If I know I'm going to go for an entry early in the round, I'll repeatedly say things like, I'm going to get him, I'm going to kill this guy, I hit these every day of the week, I hit these every month of the year, I hit these. And then I usually do. So mentality is extremely important in entry fragging. Skills. What are the most important skills for an entry fragger? In my opinion, it's the following. The first is aim. The second being movement, and the third is your utility. But let's break it down. Starting with aim. I'm including crosshair placement, reaction time, and all that kind of stuff in this category. And it should go without saying that being able to put your crosshair on the head of the enemy before they put their crosshair on you makes entry fragging pretty easy. And not being able to do that obviously makes it really difficult. Movement. Having precise movement when entry fragging is more important than you think. A lot of the time, entry fragging relies on speed and concise movements more than it does other things. Being able to move and get into position as quickly as possible requires good movement. Also, positioning yourself in good spots to take duels requires precise movement a lot of the time. This is to make sure you're taking the best angle possible, and no role in the game is jumping around as much as the entry fragger. Utility. Whilst being the least important skill out of the three, it's still something that is important to highlight. Knowing good utility can make your job as an entry fragger much easier, especially if you're alone. A simple flash you throw whilst running into a bomb site can make all the difference. And being able to adjust and react to enemies mid-entry with a piece of utility can be invaluable. So knowing your nades and how to throw them accurately and smoothly is a required skill in my opinion. Right, so how do you get better at all of these things? Aim. Obviously start with aim practice, shooting little circles or robots for many hours. For movement, you're playing KZ, you're practicing your skill jumps, and you're practicing your entry paths. And for utility, practice throwing utility in an empty server for hours. Alone. Maybe watch a podcast. All good players have done this for quite a long time. I can promise you that. Peeking is a pretty large topic, because it's more important to an entry fragger than any other role in the game. Just because they're going to be the ones doing it the most. So let's go over the basics of peeking Counter-Strike so you can entry frag better. I'm going to go over things in this section like right eye peeks, peeks advantage, distance from walls to get better angles, and shadows. First things first, the first person camera in Counter-Strike is on the right side of the model's face, which is funnily enough where the bullets come from. This means that anytime you peek to the right, you'll be seeing the enemy quicker than if you peek to the left. So whenever you are peeking, it's more advantageous to peek to the right rather than peeking to the left. So avoid left-hand peeks whenever possible. Peeker's advantage. The server and netcode in many first-person shooters gives an advantage to the peeker, which means that the peeker will see the person they're shooting at first, which is something you should abuse as much as you can by peeking out onto people rather than being the one that gets peeked onto. Thirdly, distance from angles. In Counter-Strike, the further you are from an angle, the bigger an advantage you'll have most of the time. This is because you'll see the enemy first if you're further from an angle than they are. If you don't believe me, there's an old War Owl video I recommend you watch that goes into greater depth on this topic than I'm going to here. But if you don't want to watch War Owl's video, then trust me. The further from the corner you are, the sooner you'll see the enemy relative to when they see you. Despite this though, there are times when you would peek closer to an angle as opposed to further back, such as if the enemy's too close to the angle themselves and are going to get surprised by a really close peek. Shadows. This is just a simple reminder to think about your shadow. You have a shadow, and it can give you away in certain situations, so just be mindful of it. Be mindful not to peek into an angle that shows your shadow before it shows you. Entry fragging types. In this part of the video, I'm going to talk about the 4 main types of entry fragging and how they work. Those being, during an execute, the most traditional version you think of. During a default, where you play to get an opening frag rather than run into a bomb site. CT entry fragging, trying to get an early advantage by catching the T's off guard with a push. And finally, retake. Someone needs to go in first during a retake, and that's pretty close to entry fragging. So let's start with executes. This is the most rehearsed type of entry fragging. Following an entry path, getting nades thrown for you, running in and trying to get a kill. The most important thing when entering during an execute is to take space for your team. It's important not to stop until your team has gained the space they need to win the round, clearing as many angles as you can until you have enough space to win a post plan. A key to entry fragging during an execute is prediction. If you can accurately pinpoint where the enemy's holding from the site, it makes entry fragging much easier. And even if you don't know, guessing where they are and trying to predict it is going to be much more useful to you than trying to clear every angle. This is a skill that you polish over time. And I'll talk about it more later, but if you can use information you've gained over the course of a game to understand where they might play, that's what makes an entry player much better at their job. For example, if you've been defaulting in Palace on Mirage every round, you might hear where they're throwing their nades from every round. So when you finally execute onto A, you know this player loves sitting Firebox or loves sitting default every single round. So when you run out ramp, you can pre-aim them really hard so they won't stand a chance. Next up is during a default. You aren't always going to be executing with 5 smokes, 10 flashbangs into a site. Most of the time, you're going to be defaulting. But that doesn't mean you can't get entry kills. This kind of entry fragging is much more slow and calculated most of the time than running in during an execute. It's also more consistent because you're by yourself. Also because there are less factors at play, you can have more control over the situation. This doesn't mean you have to be alone when doing this though. It can still be really useful to ask for a flash when you're trying to make a play. Okay, but how do you do it? How do you get entry frags during a default? The better question is actually when. Because defaulting in Counter-Strike is about two things in my opinion. Gaining information and gaining map control. I'm not going to go too deep on defaulting here, because it is an ocean of depth. I made a simplified flowchart of decision making just for a Palace 131 default, to show how complicated it can get. But in terms of entry fragging during a default, it's about making plays. And you should make a play when you have the information to do so. If you know where the enemy is playing, and they haven't smoked you off, and they're statically holding an angle, they are trolling. This straight up gets you killed at any decent level of Counter-Strike. Because you can pre-aim them, and with Pika's advantage, you should get the kill every single time. So if you're defaulting with your utility, fighting for map control, trying to get as much information as you can, and you get enough that you're confident where they are, go for it. Once you get good at this, it's funny how easy it is to get kills during a default against lower skilled players. So let's go through an example of something that happened in one of my games so you can get a better understanding of how this process really works. In this situation, I've been defaulting Mirage towards the A side of the map, and I know that the CTs start with a Molotov ramp and watch for a push, and then they always smoke it off. So I'm in Palace and my team are fighting mid. I know that there's a decent chance that the A anchor is alone, or at least there isn't likely to be someone looking at Palace early in the round. So as soon as that molly is about to go out, I peek from Palace as they are throwing the smoke for a free kill. I used knowledge of the opponent's positioning across the map to take a risk that I thought was worth it. If they listened out for footsteps Palace, they would have been able to react to my play, and I could have had a very difficult gunfight. And a good player won't be as simplistic as this during their default by doing the same thing every round. But they'll still have tendencies that you can abuse, which is what I wanted to convey here. CT entry fragging. Speaking of switching up your defaults, one of the ways CTs can do that is by overextending more than usual for more control by trying to get an opening kill. This is usually done with multiple players and with utility sets. It's important for anchors to throw an early round push in at least a couple times a half to keep the Ts on their toes. Although this is more of an anchor's domain, it's still technically entry fragging. But in this case, it relies much more heavily on having a good util set to support the kill you might be going for. And in this case, it's often with the goal of getting more map control rather than specifically looking for a numbers advantage with a kill. So if you're going for an entry frag on the CT side without using an AWP, then you better have a great utility set planned. You can find these by watching pro games or figuring them out yourself in an empty server. But here's an example of a simple one for A side on Mirage. Running towards ramp on Mirage, throw an early Molotov into ramp, follow that up with a smoke and a flash to get into ramp. Then you have ramp control. Following this, you can ask a teammate for a flash over the top to try and clear towards T-spawn, but this is a bit more risky. But it can also catch the Ts off guard because they won't expect it. Retakes are the last kind of entry fragging I want to talk about, because people retake relatively poorly most of the time. This is because a lot of people autopilot and don't think about retakes in a structured approach. Without going into too much depth on retakes, you should know there are two kinds: interruptive and structured. The structured approach is when CTs set up outside of a bomb site and go in together as a team when they're ready. Whereas the interruptive style opts to stop the Ts from setting up for a post plant. Again, there's more to retakes than that, but let's focus on the entry fragging aspect. In the structured approach, it requires someone to go in first in a sort of pseudo execute into the bomb site. And entry fragging during a structured retake is one of the hardest kinds. It's like a regular T-side bomb site execute, but you have less utility and they've stacked the site. So to do it effectively, you need to play really close with your teammates to be traded and have a really strong prediction in your mind of T positions. And make sure to use all of your utility that you do have very effectively. So here's a checklist of things you should do when retaking. If you're outside a bomb site and about to retake and you're going to be the first one in, 1. Take a moment, check the util of your whole team and yourself. 2. Check the most likely positions the Ts may be holding in based on the context of the round. 3. Wait for your teammates to get close behind you so they can rapidly trade your death. And then 4. Go in with a strong prediction and really focus on your crosshair. All in all, the key is thinking as much as you can before you go in, so that you're free to focus on your mechanics when the time comes. Before we move on, a mistake a lot of people make when retaking is to just autopilot. They don't play off their teammates and take extremely unlikely duels. The best retakes are when a team explodes into a bomb site all at once with good spacing, where they cover and trade each other. Entry paths. Entry paths are extremely important to understand. It's important to take the most efficient route into bomb sites, to reduce the amount of angles you're exposing yourself to, and to increase your speed. Because speed is key when entering. The longer you take to take control of a bomb site, the more CTs are going to rotate to stop you. So it's key to not waste a lot of time trying to finish a gunfight against one CT that's hiding from you. It's important to take as much space as you can, because the goal is not kills. You're the first guy in. Everyone behind you can't move forward if you stop. So when you're following an entry path, follow the entry path. Don't stop if you can help it at all. But let's get into specific entry paths. There are infinitely variable ways to enter a bomb site, obviously. But generally speaking, there are 2 entry paths for each bomb site in the game that you can choose from. And you should know both. One entry path will usually be more aggressive than the other, and one will be more safe and consistent than the other. For example, this is Mirage A site. The entry path that is most consistent moves up towards Tetris, then moves straight towards site, clearing under Palace, then 180ing to clear default, finally moving towards CT to take control there. This entry path exposes you to minimal angles and gives you decent gunfights. And combined with standard A smokes, this entry path doesn't have you walk into any potential crossfires. Now let's look at the more aggressive and less consistent entry path. You swing up towards Tetris the same way, clearing default and under Palace. Then you move up towards Sandwich and clear that. Then you swing towards Jungle and Stairs. This exposes you to a lot of crossfires, but it gives you gunfights really quickly and can catch CTs off guard. It can be good with a more pop kind of push into the A site compared to a full execute, but it is more risky than taking the site with the other entry path. When it comes to deciding between entry paths, it's important to think about what utility or resources you have, because a safe execute can pair well with the safer entry path. But a site pop with just a flash, using a safe entry path can give the enemy time to rotate in from jungle and to gun you down in conjunction with the site anchor. It can be complicated. Just think about what's best for the scenario you're in. CS is never completely black and white as to what the correct decision is. Now that I've given a decent overview of what entry paths are and some examples, I'm going to talk a bit more about how to use them. Entry paths where you clear every angle as efficiently as possible are great and all, but in a real game of CS, a great player will have an assumption in their mind about where the CT is playing on the bomb site. Even if that assumption is wrong, it's better to have a guess than to just try and clear every single angle. This is because when you pre-aim in a gunfight, it gives you a massive advantage. This doesn't mean being negligent about clearing angles, but if you have a good idea in your head about where the CT defense is, you can run down at the CT much quicker. Let's go through how this would work. If I'm deep into a half on Mirage, let's say, and I know that the CTs have been doing a standard setup, 1 A site, 1 B, 1 short, 1 window, and 1 connector at the start of the round. Then an early round execute onto the A site would let you know that there's only likely 1 player on site. So when you're entering, you assume he's probably going to be default. That's where you think he is, based on the Molotov angle that you've seen thrown every round or information you've heard by defaulting earlier in the half. Using the information you gain throughout a half to pre-aim during an entry path makes entering much easier, because you'll usually be left-hand peeking into an angle that they're perfectly holding you on. Pre-aiming more than evens that field, because no matter how good you are, if someone is hard pre-aiming where your head is, that's an almost impossible gunfight. Last note on entry paths before we move on, you'd need a decently high enough sensitivity. I don't mean anything too far above average, just that you need to be able to comfortably do a 180, because oftentimes you'll be running into a lot of crossfires during entry paths. When to entry. When to entry depends on what your goals are and what skill level you have. I'm going to go through 3 skill levels and what they mean about when you should try to go for an entry frag, starting from when a complete beginner should go for an entry frag, all the way up to when the best players should be going for an entry frag. If you're completely new to CS or new to entry fragging as a mindset, then you should be running it down every game. If you don't know the entry timings for when the CTs meet the Ts on every map in every position, or if you aren't completely comfortable in taking these entry gunfights, then this is where you are at. You need to learn these angles and gunfights so well that you can do them without thinking. And you need to learn all the variations that can happen. You need to learn what utility you can use to help you, and what utility you can expect the CTs to use to stop you, or different positions or ways that the enemies can take the gunfights. Overall, just pushing the limits of what you can actually get away with. Now, it's important not to judge your actions by the result of them. Think about whether the action you took was good or not, and disconnect it from the outcome. And honestly, you should try and enjoy this process. There's something liberating about just running it down to learn as much as you can. Now for the next level up. You should be entry fragging to test or push your limits based on the information you have. This level is where you know all the simplest fights, you know every timing on the map and every permeation of utility that is going to be thrown by either side. At this level, you should still be trying to push your limits, trying to get away with as much as the enemy lets you. This means pushing through smokes, taking risky gunfights, trying to test how much attention the CTs are really paying. In general, you should be going for plays that you think will work, but also plays that you aren't sure are going to work. This level is all about learning what works and what doesn't. It's like the first level, just slightly less mindless, because you'll be using information more and trying to entry slower, doing it in defaults more often. This is where you start to learn to be more calculated in your entry fragging. But to learn, you should still be taking calculated risks. Think about every entry you go for before you do it, and then think if it was a good idea afterwards. And don't base whether it was good or not solely on the outcome. For the last, more advanced level of when to entry, the most winning answer is to do it when it will work. I know this sounds obvious, but this is really just an extension of the previous level. This is because the higher up you go in the ranks, the less mistakes people make, and the more you will have learned. Eventually, you'll learn what works and what doesn't. You'll learn how likely a play you're about to go for is to work. And once you're here, you should only really be going for plays that are worth the risk reward of trying them. Because you can't assume basic mistakes will happen with higher elo players. They don't throw smokes or molotovs and not watch for the push. They don't stand out in the open holding a static angle all round. And they don't make noise showing where on the site they are. Against better players, it obviously gets much harder to entry. So you just entry less. Only going for it when you have enough information or resources backing you up to go for it. Balancing that risk reward towards your own favor. And again, you only learn what chance a play has of working by doing it over and over again in different situations. But I want to leave this section with a trick that might win you a game or two. When the game is down to the wire, getting really intense, and a round will decide everything, people are going to get nervous, yourself included. So how do we stop this? When you're in that situation, when the game is down to the wire, sort of as a trigger in my mind, okay, now is my opportunity. I love going for entry frags in this game state. People are nervous and not playing their best, and it helps me shake off any nerves I have by replacing it with, I'm gonna do something crazy. An extremely confident solo entry attempt, where you take a reasonable amount of risk, is much more effective in these kinds of rounds, because players have a tendency to get into a rhythm by the end of the game. They have a certain level of expectation for the amount of risk you're gonna take, and what duels they are gonna really be expecting. So if you do something like running out of palace 20 seconds into the round dry, you can often get a better fight than you should have any right to. Opening moves. Opening moves are a big part of CS. They're defined by utility sets and fights taken. Every player has a few of these that they always fall back onto. An opening move is something you can do at the start of the round to get an advantage. This can be a kill or map control or even just information. How do you find opening moves for yourself? There are great resources online that show a lot of them. YouTube channels like Mahone TV are for back in CSGO, but the information is still largely good and can inspire you to come up with new opening moves for yourself. Or you can just do the legwork yourself and watch some pro demos. But the reason that opening moves work so well and that they're so commonly used is because of one thing: variables. The lack of variables in an early round of CS lets you control pretty specifically what's going to happen and the variations of what can happen, which leads to consistent value. They work so well because they're often really robust and hard to find mistakes in. And opening moves can be really simple and quick, or they can be really complicated and long. It's just important to find one that works for you, and one you can replicate. Here's an opening move to take under on Mirage. From here, you can move towards mid, hold for a peek, or go back and take control elsewhere. Consistently getting under control, stopping CT pushes under, and making mid more dangerous for CTs to stay in is very valuable. And here's a slightly more complicated opening move. It's useful to have opening moves set up like this, that you can fall back onto to make your play more consistent. It's much better than trying to come up with a new plan at the start of every round. If you know what you're doing more concretely with opening moves, it can make you more adaptable when an unforeseen situation does come up. One of the reasons why pros are so good at the game is because they don't have to make as many choices in their opening. If you're put in a new situation during an opening move, you have to decide and process all the variables at play in that moment. Great players have already thought out and played out most permeations of the opening move they're doing. So when something unforeseen comes to them, there's not much thinking they have to do and they can focus on their crosshair. And just as a little tangent, this concept goes beyond opening moves. It's about the pre-think. The more you think, the more you plan before you do something, the easier it is to execute it. This concept is one you should practice with opening moves where the variables are low, because it transfers to any moment in CS you don't need to be actively focusing on your crosshair. Whenever you've got a moment, like if you're holding an angle, think about the most likely scenario that can occur and what your plan is to react to them. That way, when you are fighting, and there isn't any time to think, you'll make decisions quicker because they were made before the fight even started. But like I said, opening moves are all about the fights you take and the utility you use. So let's move on. Utility. Entry fragging is more about utility than a new player might think. And that goes for the whole of Counter-Strike, if I'm going to be honest. I'm going to talk about utility from two perspectives here. The utility you use, and the utility that's used against you. Let's start with the utility that you use. An entry fragger should aim to be efficient with utility. If you buy a piece of utility, make sure you have a plan for it. Don't waste money on a full utility belt if you're planning on being aggressive in an opening move. Let's look at both outcomes here. So if you're taking that aggressive opening move, and you win the fight, you probably don't need a full belt of utility to win the 4v5. But if you do that and you lose the fight, the extra utility is a complete waste. If you are going to take aggressive action, or any reasonable amount of risk, drop whatever utility you do have in a safe place. Usually util is either dropped at the spawn, or in a location that your team rotates through. But when it comes to actually throwing the utility, a flash when entering makes all the difference. Utility is one of the most complex parts of Counter-Strike, so I can't get too in depth here. But from a pure entry fragger perspective, if I had one point to make, it'd be to focus on having good flashbangs. Entry fragging is all about that first fight, negating as many variables as possible to win that one opening duel. And those opening duels are infinitely easier when the enemy is seeing white. Utility is key for an entry fragger, to have a plan and execute it. But a basic use for each piece of utility in entry fragging is as follows. Flashes are great to throw mid-entry. As long as you know one good flashbang that doesn't blind you, you're golden. Smokes are good for lurking around, or smoking molotovs before you run in. And you can use a smoke for more than one purpose. It can get you through angles and stop choke points being molotoved. This doesn't work everywhere, but does work extremely well on some sites like B-apps on Mirage. And it's great to throw smokes at a choke sometimes before the CTs have thrown their molotov, so you won't have to get a smoke out mid-entry. Molotovs aren't as useful for entry players, because the only time you can throw them is when there's a pause in the action. But if you combo it with a lurk smoke, you can get a molotov through to eliminate an angle before you go in. And there are some entry paths that let you throw one relatively safely. An obvious one is molotov in car on B Mirage. Nades are pretty useless in entry fragging, and should only really be used if the enemy throws out a strange defensive smoke in the middle of the site. But again, similar to molotovs, if you can get one off that gives you value, sure. The only other trick I can think of for nades and entry fragging is throwing a nade across an angle, because the nade smoke will cover you. And before you think about nading open smokes, it's not really practical. It's more in the opening kill wheelhouse where it reveals an enemy on the other side of the smoke, because running into a nade is not the best idea. As far as utility being used against you, smokes are not walls, molotovs are not walls, flashbangs do not stop you, and nades don't stop you either. What I mean by this is that utility can't stop you unless you let it. You can run through smokes and molotovs. Even if you're flashed, you can keep moving and pushing forward to take space and get traded. Even if you're naded, and this is a bit difficult because of the aim punch, but you can still headshot them. As long as you have a plan on how you're going to react to enemy utility, it won't stop you. The other thing to remember about utility is that even though utility can be dropped and players can rotate, it still pays to count the utility that the enemy uses. And instead of thinking about it as a surety of no smokes are going to be on one side of the map, think about it in terms of probabilities. If B apartment has been smoked twice in the round already, it's not impossible, but it is unlikely that a third smoke is coming. So you can plan your entry for that timing. When to stop mid-entry. You all know that one guy in a pug who's at the front and then, uh-oh, I accidentally hit a wall. I guess I'm at the back of the pack now. Or they're running in and bam, well I guess I can't entry now, there's a molotov there. It's annoying and we all think that guy's a beta and he sucks, but there are times when an entry just shouldn't happen. We can all agree that if you're entering and you see 2 Molotovs in front of you, you just can't go. But if it's just 1 flashbang, then you should be entering. So you might think that there is a line somewhere in between these 2 examples of when you should and shouldn't enter. This isn't really correct, because every situation is unique. The thing to think about is the power of your entry attempt versus the response that is stopping you. A full site execute should be able to stop almost anything, including a double Molotov, because that's the maximum power attack that you can do, and you can smoke the Molotovs if all the players are present and can continue into the site. But an unexpected pop with just a flash being mollied off, maybe it's worth reconsidering. The point I'm trying to get across is that you shouldn't just be stopped by their response. You should measure what you and your team are doing against their response and if you can overcome it or not. This is a game sense thing, and it takes a lot of learning and trial and error to get used to, and you're not always going to get it right, but it's important to at least try to think about it as much as you can, because if you know before you're carrying out an execute what would make you stop, then it's much easier to make that decision and act quicker when it does happen. Cerebral entry play. I mentioned it earlier, but people used to think of entry players as blunt force objects meant to run through brick walls. But since then, Counter-Strike has evolved a lot. Entry players have to be smarter and more precise. This is because the defense has gotten a lot better. People at a decent level often aren't too prone to dying against a dry peek at a random time. So how do we try and play smarter? It all comes back to game sense. And all game sense really is how you analyze and understand the game as you play it. Now obviously game sense can help you no matter what role you play, but for an entry fragger, knowing what to expect when you run in trying to get an entry makes all the difference. So when you're playing a game of CS, do not autopilot. You really don't have the time not to pay attention. You should be watching an angle, your minimap, or looking at your current status, with extra emphasis on the minimap. The minimap tells you so much information, more than your teammates ever will, and more than you can get from sound. Game sense is all about processing information to form a picture in your mind of what the enemy team is doing and what your team is doing. I think people can get stuck with this idea because they don't know for sure where enemies are, even if they saw them for a second on the minimap. I think a better way of thinking about this, to help your game sense, is to think about it in terms of probabilities. If you see 3 people on a minimap, if you go out B, there's a much lower chance of you running into more than 1 person. And using information and game sense to get yourself an even or advantaged 1v1 is what entry fragging is all about. So as you're trying to improve as an entry fragger, stay attentive and keep thinking. Another aspect of playing smarter as an entry fragger is understanding risk versus reward. I've mentioned it a bit up until now, but now I'm going to fully explain this concept here because it's really important. Sometimes CS is just about luck. There's no getting around it. Sometimes things just won't go your way. And on the other side of that is sometimes things will go exactly your way. You can't control that. You might make a bad play and win, or you might make a good play and lose, which is why it's so important to have a mindset of risk versus reward. Before you do anything in CS, understand the risk of doing it against the potential reward that you can get. Let's go through an example. If you run out middle on Mirage with a deagle and try and 1-deag the window player, I'd say you have a relatively low chance of getting that frag. But the potential reward is extremely high when you're on a low economy round. So that makes the risk versus reward worth it in that situation. And for a bad example of risk versus reward, if you're in a post plant, you know if you hide and wait, there's no way for the enemy to win the round. Compared to the risk of losing the round, the reward you get for peeking is relatively low. But let's say you peek and you win. Was it a good play? No, it wasn't. Let's say you only lose that fight 1 out of 10 times. Over the course of the next 10 times you're in that situation, you'll lose 1 round. Which is why understanding risk versus reward is so important. It stops you making those mistakes. This reframing of plays will make you more process oriented rather than results oriented, which means that you won't do things that were just lucky one time, and you will try and do things that are good plays and just didn't work out. It can also make CS a lot less frustrating. Rather than wasting your time trying to blame yourself or your teammates, you spend energy on improving and understanding your own action. Space taking. This video is about entry fragging, more specifically being the first in, going for an opening. And over the years, what it means to be an entry fragger has changed a lot. The name entry fragger itself can even be considered kind of outdated at this point. A term a lot of people use is space taker. The reason for this is that an entry fragger used to be the first guy in, running in with the intention of getting a kill or being traded. And this isn't really efficient in modern CS. Having a guy die to brute force into a bomb site isn't as common a strategy as it used to be, and players needed to be more self-sufficient on the extremities of the map, getting openings on their own by abusing the weaknesses in the enemy's defense. So the name Space Taker started to come about. People whose job it is to take space on the map, generally during a default. And the best Space Taker can be responsible for some really high impact opening frags. They will take space by slowly creeping up over the course of the round, all to give CTs another flank to be worried about. And if the CTs fight back into the space, this can lead to the Space Taker getting some really high impact frags. But it's important to understand, their job isn't necessarily to go for opening. It's more to take that space, take that map control. But if they see a gap, they can go for that opening kill. I've been talking about how to be an entry fragger, because the distinction can be small sometimes, because a Space Taker can entry frag, but not all entry frags are from Space Takers. If you're on the extremities of the map and not immediately running in, that's what space taking is. To do it effectively, you should really focus on your crosshair placement and the gunfights you take. I don't really want to go into more depth here because at a certain point in the round, space taking becomes lurking, which is a whole different video. So let's focus on that early part of space taking, where you're moving forwards to get an advantage, clearing as many angles as you can. The thing that makes the best space takers in the world have more impact in the game is that they truly contest the space that they're in. They punish sloppy defaults and enemy mistakes, taking complete control of the space they're in, and using that control to force the enemy to either re-clear it and take a bad duel, or give up on the space and have the chance that they get lurked onto, which makes any duel taken after that slightly easier, because they might get turned onto, or be in a worse spot in general. How to play around bad teammates. You're gonna get good teammates, you're gonna get bad teammates. What's important is how you react and adjust in those situations. At the end of the day, there's no point jumping in first if you know the guy behind you is incapable of trading you. And if the guy behind you is a sick player, maybe you should set your ego aside, drop him a gun, and jump for him. What's most important is to meet players where they're at. Go with what they're doing. I had an odd game on Inferno once. This girl on my team was being pissy at this other guy who was being sexist. You know, your average faceit game. I ignored them and played on. It was kind of funny. The game was getting kind of close near the end. And this was a pretty low elo game for my rank at the time. And at one point, the girl just started running it down mid, even though we'd almost won the game. She died top mid with a P90 3 rounds in a row. And on that 4th round, she ran it down mid. I threw a flashbang to help her out. The enemies expected another free kill from a trolling player, and she got a double kill and we won the game. What you can take away from this is that even if people are actively trolling, you can still use them to win. This applies to almost every teammate you're going to get. If you get really passive players, maybe they just need you not to die in the first 45 seconds of the round, because that's not how they're going to play. And if you get really aggressive players on your team, maybe you going in first doesn't help them. Maybe they need someone to flash for them and to trade them. Understand what your team needs and fill the gaps. But with that being said, this is still a video about entry fragging, because if you run into a site and kill 2 people, that is the most winningest move in CS. Regardless of how bad your team is, you should win that round. If you have bad teammates and are thinking that the only way to win is extreme personal success in the round, that simply isn't true. You just need to understand the win conditions of your team to win rounds. If your team are betas, let them trade you. If your team are passive and don't want to do anything, play slower, using utility to gain map control and waiting for your team to do something. Then entry for them. There's always a solution. Look for it and understand it. But it's got to be said, at the end of the day, you simply won't win every game you play, no matter how well you're playing. But in trying to solve the puzzle of how to win each game you're in, that's how you reach a deeper understanding of the game. Entry fragging concepts. This section exists as a few extra concepts and things I want you to understand that don't really fit cleanly anywhere else in the video, but they're still extremely important to know. Let's start with crosshairs and how to control them. I'm not talking about your own. Controlling the way your enemy moves their crosshair is important, and there are techniques you can use to manipulate it. The reason this concept is important for entry fraggers is because sometimes you can get more value from trying to divert the crosshair of an enemy than you can from trying to attempt to kill them. And this is never more prevalent than it is in pistol rounds. Let's go through 2 ways the Ts can take a fight against CTs. In this example, you're in B apps on Mirage, and the CT is ready to fight you at the other end of apps. The first way you can take this fight is for both players to swing wide. And the second way is for the first player to just jump out and the second player swings wide. But which is better? In the first example, the CT has to hit 2 relatively mediocre shots. It's not easy to hit 2 rapid one-taps, but it's certainly doable. And both players are at the same head level, so not much movement of the crosshair is needed. In the second example, the CT player's decision making is much more complicated. They have 3 choices. 1, to shoot at the player jumping mid-air. 2, to wait until they land and shoot them when they do. Or 3, predict that they'll have a teammate and try and wait to shoot the teammate that peeks after them. Comparing this to the other example, the existence of more choices for the CT to make than just to shoot the first person they see makes the gunfight much more difficult for them. And this isn't a perfect world. They don't have time to consider what choice to make. Oftentimes, the CT player will just react and try and shoot the jumping player mid-air. And as their crosshair is diverted upwards, trying to hit that very difficult shot, the second player can swing in and get a few shots off themselves that are going to be much easier for them to hit. Does this mean you should be jumping around every corner to divert the crosshairs of the enemy? No, because this works best when the enemy doesn't have an automatic weapon, or any weapon that can body shot you to kill you in a reasonable amount of time. But if you're going for an entry in a pack and you really need that kill and to not allow a multi-frag from the opponent, jumping around the corner to peek and get traded by a teammate is a relatively consistent way to ensure a kill happens, even against automatic weapons. The concept of diverting crosshairs goes beyond this one example. It's something that permeates through all of Counter-Strike in different ways. Flashing to have someone turn away and mess up their crosshair placement as they turn back, tapping the crouch key mid-gunfight to dodge a headshot, and even just off angles in general that you play to avoid getting pre-aimed. So much of Counter-Strike is about messing with the enemy's crosshair placement, and it can help you entry frag if it's something you master and think about. The next concept is tradability. This connects pretty simply to what I was just talking about with jumping out for people, as it makes you really easy to trade. And one of the things that make entry fraggers really good is how easy they are to trade. Because if you run out and die without killing anyone, it's fine as long as you get traded. If you've ever run out and died and wondered, where the hell is my team? This is for you. Because if they aren't in a position to trade you, then you're the one who made the mistake. It's on you to make sure you're tradable. How do you do this? It's simple. Just check. Before running in, turn around and make sure they are A, close enough to try and trade you, and B, seem willing enough with their body language or comms to try and follow you in. Being tradable is a skill, and it's an especially important skill for an entry fragger who's going to get traded the most. But you obviously don't have to be always tradable. Solo plays are still useful and valuable, but being tradable at every chance you get is extremely valuable as well. Concept number 3. Playing to your current form. If you're in the best form of your life, hitting every shot, dominating the opponent, you probably shouldn't be playing the same way as normal. You should probably take more risks and take more disadvantaged gunfights that you wouldn't usually win. Really dominate the opponents, because this is how you see players having such dominant games. It isn't because they're twice as good, it's because they're 20% better than the enemy, and they know it. They know they can win every gunfight they take because they have better aim, so they take as many gunfights as they can. The opposite of this is also true though. If you aren't playing your best, maybe you didn't sleep enough. Maybe you should just sit back a bit and let yourself be carryable. Instead of forcing it and trying to get back into the game, just relax. Play for your team a bit more. Assist them with utility and your body going in first, and really be tradable in this instance. The worst thing you can do for your team when you're in bad form is to force them to repeatedly play 4 versus 5 as you try and get your way back into the game. Just play to your form, that's all. It takes a lot of pressure off when you're having a bad game. If you know that you're not going to pop off and you're not going to kill everyone, just focus on what you can do in the current game state. But this obviously doesn't mean you shouldn't try and get back into games. It just means to take it slow, to not force anything. And I have a simple trick that I use to get back into the games myself, but it only really works because I've played a lot of games. And that trick is this. It's just one simple line I say to myself. I've done it before. I've played thousands of hours, loads of games, and I've had crazy comebacks, crazy games where I played really well after bombing out in the first half. And if you've done it before, why can't you do it again? The pressure of, oh my god, I'm so trash, is really easy to ignore if, you've come back into a crazy game before. If you had bad games and won them, it's easy to think you can do it again. And there's no real point in thinking anything else is true. If you aren't at this point yet where you've had a crazy comeback, maybe just fake it until you make it. I've done it. I'm not like a crazy good player, so why can't you? Next concept is communication. Here's my hot take. Comms aren't important. I know, shock and all. Not in pugs. 90% of what your teammates tell you in pugs is pointless and distracting. That 10% might help. Maybe. Or that 90% might piss you off and it might tilt you off the face of the earth. Or it might even just be a lie. People give bad comms all the time. So what can we do about this? Focus on yourself. And more specifically, focus on your minimap. It's such a good piece of information that's really reliable. If you're someone who gets mad when other people don't use their mic and don't give information, 1, you should probably focus more on yourself. And 2, you should probably pay more attention to your minimap. But back to entry fragging and how it relates to your communication. Now, when I'm talking about comms and I call them useless, I mean listening to other people. I don't mean giving them yourself. So after you entry, you should do one thing. Give quick, clear, concise comms. Communicate information. Not guesses, not estimations or directions. Information. Exactly what you saw. Do that and it helps your team. Give the 10% of comms that do actually help. And as a tangent on other points to make about comms, never instruct your team on how to play. Just focus on yourself instead of worrying about what the other 4 members of your team are doing. If you want someone to do something, or you want to do something as a team, don't tell everyone, we're going A. Go do A smokes. Don't say that. A better way of saying is, do you guys want to go A? And sometimes if the lobby is really silent and people don't want to speak, but you still think you should try this plan anyway, just brute force it. Say, I'm going out A, I would appreciate if someone can flash or trade me, and hope that your team follows or helps in any way, but don't expect it. It's all about expectation, or rather, the lack of expectation you should have for your teammates. Communicate facts, not opinion. What you're doing and what you see is important. Everything else is pointless and often can have a negative impact. This is because people just don't like being told what to do, and guesses or bad information can cause more harm than good. The next concept is Team CS versus Pug CS. Now, entry fragging exists no matter how coordinated your team is. Someone has to go in first at some point in the round. But the way you do it and the things you do change a lot when you have a team behind you that's coordinated. Solo plays become less necessary and are often slightly less effective. And you can ask for more help when entering in the form of flashes and executes and teammates to trade you. But it's not all positives. Even if it is a more efficient and ultimately better way of playing CS as a team environment inherently comes with less freedom. If someone makes a call, your in-game leader, the team has to follow it, and this can lead you into following bad or misguided calls. Being an entry fragger in a team means that you're going to have to be the one taking a lot of hits. So adjust yourself mentally to be ready for that, and to try and have more of a voice in your team when you think something's a good or a bad idea, which is why a lot of in-game leaders also tend to be entry fraggers. And Team CS has its weaknesses too. If you're an entry fragger against a 5-stack, you might notice that they have one player who's much worse than the rest of them, and you can target them. There's no reason to give them a fair fight. Alternatively, there might be one player hard carrying them. You can group up and focus down that player with multiple players and lots of utility. And playing against Team CS is easier than it sounds. 5-stacks have a lot of weaknesses inherent to the grouped, rigid way that they tend to play. But on the other side is pugs, which can feel like the Wild West. Crazy people everywhere. Pug CS is about dealing with random situations. It's not about how coordinated your team is, it's about how well you play individually. That's how you get better. It's all about you in solo queue, the decisions you make, not the teams you play against or who you play with. And as for gameplay differences, there's a much larger emphasis on solo plays, getting solo entry kills on the extremities of the map, going for kills into bomb sites with little to no help, trying to win your team the game. If you watch this whole video, I really appreciate it. It's one of the first things I've made, and if anyone was entertained enough or found it helpful enough to give me 50-ish minutes of their time, I'm truly thankful. But I hope to keep making better and better videos in the future, so until next time, good luck and have fun.